Hello, I'm MacKenzie Babb, External Affairs Director for the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by my friend and colleague, Professor Paul Friga. Professor Friga teaches courses here at UNC Kenan-Flagler in Management Consulting and Strategy and has been actively exploring the impact of COVID-19 on higher ed since the pandemic hit. Now, before we dive into his findings, I'll clarify that what we will be discussing today applies to higher ed across the board. Professor Friga will be speaking in his capacity as a researcher, and neither he nor I will be speaking on behalf of UNC or on its budget situation in particular. With that said, let's dive in. Professor Friga, I know you've just undertaken an assessment of the true negative financial impact of the virus on higher ed. Tell me a little bit about your research and methodology, along with what motivated you to work on this issue in particular.
Sure. Thank you, MacKenzie. Hello, everyone. I don't know about you, but since this pandemic started, I've had problems sleeping, and not just due to the stress of what's going on, but for me, a passion to try to help. I've been working on research. In my past background, I was a consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers, did turnaround consulting, and then worked for McKinsey and did some higher ed consulting before I got my PhD and my MBA at Carolina. And I've been teaching for about 20 years. So this research project was as part of that role, plus my Kenan-Flagler role. And also we teamed up with EY Parthenon, a top higher education consulting firm, to track what's really going on in higher ed. No surveys, but checking the actual articles that have been written and the announcements by the institutions, putting together a huge database. We targeted the top 400 U.S. News and World Report institutions, as well as the top 100 liberal arts. And so we scanned the news for any articles about that, put it in a database to study the revenue and the budget hits that are taking place since pandemic through the end of December of 2020.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. Now, for your most piece of research, can you walk me through some of your key findings and tell me about how dire the situation for higher ed really is?
MacKenzie, it's not good. I've done a couple of interviews and written some articles about the potential magnitude, and you've been hearing some stories in the news. My research suggests that it could be actually even worse than what you're hearing. As this slide shows, these are the reasons that the institutions are realizing such a negative hit to financial resources. Obviously, the top line is lost revenues. There are decreasing enrollments, there are frozen tuitions, which is essentially a decrease in revenue because we're typically increasing tuitions every year. And auxiliary revenues are taking a dramatic hit with students not on campus for food, for housing, for all kinds of extra services. Athletics, a major hit to institutions. Our calculations show about an average of 14% for institutions since March. And that translates, when you look at higher ed in general, on a $600 billion spend, about $85 billion in lost revenue. Not only are they getting hit with lost revenue, they're also experiencing expenses trying to open safely and protect their faculty, their staff, and the students. They've been doing communication protocols, they have operational changes, and the APLU issued a report about public institutions, and which showed about a 28% of lost revenue is accountable to these additional expenses. So there's another 24 billion. And then finally, there's more to come on a negative way, because many states are losing revenue from obviously corporations having decreased economic output, individuals paying less taxes. And so that takes a little while to work its way through. So there are announced cuts. Some states are announcing between 30 and 50%. North Carolina has been better in keeping us stable, but we expect to see at least 25%. That was the Great Recession. States decreased support by about 25% as a response to that. Fortunately, the one good news is that the market has held through this, so we haven't lost tremendous returns from endowments or philanthropy, but that's at risk too. So these may be conservative, but you add that up and it's 183 billion of potential damage to the 4,000 higher ed institutions in the US.
Tell me, what's the role of the federal government in responding to this? Do the federal proposals currently in debate, would they meet the needs, or do we need more support?
Unfortunately, they're not going to meet the need. And our associations have been trying very hard to rally the support. My research suggests that maybe we should be asking for even more. I do worry a bit when you just try to get a bailout and government just, you think just getting the money to fill it without any accountability or changes to operating models is probably a bad idea. So maybe that's some of the issues with the money, but we've lost between 300 and 500,000 jobs in higher ed since the pandemic started. That is amazing. 14% of the workforce has been separated, many have furloughs, but also layoffs. So we're losing a lot of employment, and there's economic impact for communities as well. The CARES Act was nice. It was about $14 billion. Half of that went to students, which was great. But so that leaves $7 billion for institutions. In December, we passed the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which was about $23 billion rounded. That comes to $12 billion. So you got about $19 billion that's been passed so far. Well, that's a bit shy of the 183 that I've estimated could be taking place in terms of potential impact. And then a shortfall of about 164. The current Biden proposal accounts for about $35 billion more. If we assume half for students, there's 18 billion more. So we're looking at almost 150 billion still of a gap that would have to made up somehow, either in future stimulus, which is probably unlikely, or the universities make the changes themselves. So this is dire in terms of how much impact it can have. The current GOP proposal that's being considered doesn't have any money for higher ed funding, and they're also hesitant to give the states funding. If you don't give the states funding, they're going to get hurt even worse, and then the higher ed funding is a discretionary spend for them. So all of this is very, very dicey. There are projections of 10 to 20% of institutions that are financially in operating deficits that might fold. Small privates that aren't differentiated will be really hit. Small publics, regional publics. I mean, publics in general have been under a lot of pressure already from decreasing state support. And so they've been trying to stay lean and mean already. Now they're going to have even more to deal with. And it's just, it's an opportunity. And people who know me know that I'm actually an optimistic person. I sound very pessimistic about this, but this is actually an opportunity for us to make what I would say are long overdue changes in many of our institutions in higher ed.
You know, a lot of critics have said with costs skyrocketing during the past years and decades in higher ed, the industry is really ripe for disruption. What changes do you think we're going to see for the long term coming out of our current situation?
That's a great question. And as a strategy professor, we teach our MBA students to think about macro forces that would lead an industry to change. Well, they've been at work in higher ed for a while. For these 6 years that I started this consortium of universities to share administrative labor data and academic labor to make better decisions about the resource allocations. I co-founded that with Steve Beiser and Joe Rice, and we have been focused on trying to help mostly public institutions deal with their operating models, but the macro forces have been hitting us in terms of somewhat decreasing resources, in terms of new technology offerings that some have not paid attention to as much as they should, such as online learning. That's a disruptive force. Government accountability for return on investment, really making sure students move toward graduation. And being more inclusive with students. Arizona State has completely disrupted and changed their business model to be more inclusive and judged by the number of students. And they're up to over 130,000 students because they changed their business model. There's so much inertia in higher ed. We live in a bubble, and we just felt that we don't need to make the systematic changes that other industries make on an ongoing basis. They get more efficient every year. They have new offerings to meet the customer what they want. And so we've been a bit isolated, but these macro forces have busted that. Again, why is it an opportunity? Because it's a chance for us to look at what do we offer? Do we need as many institutions as we have? Do we have redundancy in offerings? Do we have the right academic design model in terms of classes? What about the mix of online versus residential? So in summary, we've been analyzing different options. Tuition increases are not going to be the answer. As this slide shows, the tuition most likely is going to be frozen for most of the institutions. And I can't see that they can significantly increase that as they did after the Great Recession, 3 to 5% a year, but never really decreasing because of the strain it puts on students and families. There's $1.7 trillion in debt, and student and families just can't sustain that. That's one of the big reasons that especially disadvantaged students or those who don't have the means will drop out, and that hurts our economy as well. So we can't just increase tuitions as a solution. What are they going to do? They need to make major changes. So first is to publicly admit it, be transparent, work collaboratively with your board, with your cabinet, and with your faculty and your staff. No time for silos. This is a time to come together to solve an emergency. The next action step is going to be redoing the operating model. Everything from strategic, operational, financial. It really is going to include academic cuts and administrative cuts. They're just necessary when you go through an efficiency review. We have to find ways to use technology differently to change our business processes, but we probably need fewer people working on certain, especially repetitive tasks between central and decentral units. So administration has to look at how they do things and become more efficient. They could reallocate those resources to the ones that are more needed, like student health services, enrollment services, career services, which is critical for graduation. So fixing the allocation of the administrative services, but academics has to step up too. This is a very uncomfortable topic. We don't like in academics to start a program and then end a program. We like to start programs and keep them going. And we also don't adjust our programs to what the market needs on a regular basis. So there is going to be some big changes. Just today in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, there was an article about Kansas, the Board of Regents, freeing up the ability to make changes to faculty with tenure. Not going to exigency to say that we're in that bad a situation, but to give some leeway for a period of time, a year or two. Faculty, of course, are not going to like that scenario, but faculty should be open to saying we want to be more productive. We're okay looking at do we have some unproductive faculty in terms of teaching and research and service? How do we look at our model to make changes? Because you will not solve it from administrative cuts alone. It's going to have to be both to have this kind of magnitude. So we have to also think positively about new programs, new online programs, new programs that better suit students that are the needs of today. So it's a chance really for a fresh look at how we do things. We should get more money from government. Government is fair to ask for accountability, and we should be accountable. We should make the right kind of changes for society to maintain the jobs and increase the effect of the critical part of higher ed in society today.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Friga, for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I really appreciate your insights. For those who are interested in learning more about Professor Friga's work, you're welcome to visit kenaninstitute.unc.edu. If you'd like to schedule time to speak with Professor Friga, ask him your questions further, you're welcome to reach out to me. Again, my name is MacKenzie Babb. My email address is MacKenzie_Babb@kenan-flagler.unc.edu. You can also find all of my contact information at kenaninstitute.unc.edu. We'll wrap up there. Have a great day, all.